Hello everyone, welcome to another conversation as we discuss voices of leadership. I'm your host, Hugo de Batika. Today we're discussing human capital, human resources. Our guest, an incredible woman, Njabulo Mashigo, who's made enormous strides in the world of human resources. Njabulo, welcome to the show and thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Hugo. Excited to be here.
So let's talk about how human resources came to the fore. Let's also talk about where it all began.
Yeah.
What were the values by which you were raised, the values that make you the human resource or human capital expert that you are today?
Yeah. So where did it all begin? Born in Alexandra Township. Knew nothing about human resources. I just kind of stumbled upon it actually when I was at university already. So going to varsity, I wanted to do journalism, then thought, no, maybe clinical psychology, and eventually ended up in industrial psychology, which led to human resources. From a values perspective, I would really say my parents, my dad being a teacher, my mom a social worker, I would say, I suppose one of the things they valued was education. Um, and more than anything for me, it was just curiosity in terms of what is possible, what is out there. And as I've mentioned, up to the point where I was at university, going to the student advisor's office, like, what can I do with the psychology degree? So many options, so many choices, and eventually choosing industrial psychology.
So obviously, psychology to a very large degree allows you to understand how people operate, how people function.
Mm.
Was it at that point that your curiosity was aroused?
Absolutely. I think always been curious about people and human dynamics. Again, initially thinking maybe in a clinical setting, I found that to be quite heavy when I got the exposure in second year of university. I said, okay, maybe not. The joke though about industrial psychology, I also think it was the other extreme way. In the textbook, it sounded much more lively and exciting. It's all about teamwork and getting everybody to work together, unions and management and employees coming around the table, having a conversation on how to make the world a better place. Definitely not as cute and romantic when you meet a real union and they stand on top of a table and you have to have difficult negotiations. But certainly that's where the fascination with just human development and human behavior came from.
I find it interesting that you talk about the unions and them standing on tables. Now, that's something that a lot of university students do.
Yeah.
Stand on tables and throw a whole barrage of things.
Mm.
So, when you're in university and you were studying industrial psychology, you were certainly preparing for it. What those processes going through your mind as to why do young men and women, particularly in university, sometimes revolt, if you will,
Mm.
fight authority, and throw stuff to get themselves heard?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I was that advanced, to be honest, during the period of studying and being at university. I first of all, I was 16 years old, so started university quite young. I think relatively naive. But as I've come into the workplace, young people have become a point of fascination because we go and we recruit young people and we want them to become future CEOs, and you can feel the tension and the rebellion with systems, whether it's corporate or as you are alluding to within organizations. And I think it's just that sense of just being misunderstood and those generational differences that come on the growth journey. Yeah.
So you talk about scouting for future CEOs, and these are
Yeah.
people that are 21, 22, or thereabouts, sometimes a little bit older.
Mm.
What are you looking for at that point? And how do you determine that this 25-year-old who's come from university was potentially throwing bricks or fighting leadership,
Yeah.
right? Could potentially head this or any other organization.
Yeah. I suppose in the beginning, it's really looking for, that latent potential. And there's ways. I mean, formally, you can do assessments to get a sense of people's aptitude, their learning agility, which gives you a sense of potentially maybe from their conceptual reasoning or numerical reasoning, depending on what you're assessing, you would get a sense of how far they could potentially stretch themselves. But the truth is always, when it becomes practical, where you are looking at characteristics in terms of already, even maybe in some of those instances that you refer to at university, where they're showing leadership, standing for something, for a viewpoint, leading other students in a particular direction. So it's really looking for those signals in terms of what could be there as aptitude. But more than anything, I think organizations have graduate programs and have systems to then unlock that potential. And it's about who rises to that challenge. Particularly today when there's lots of ambiguity and it's not about having all the answers, but that willingness to navigate towards those answers. Yeah.
A few things I want to touch on, and the first
Yeah.
thing is that you typically, when one narrates their career or their journey, they talk about A to Z. Yours is A to A, from Alexandra to Amsterdam, right? Walk us through the transition, right, from being a young girl in a black township to a very cosmopolitan city. What are some of the key lessons that you learned over the years?
A few. I think before getting to Amsterdam, I think definitely being born in Alexandra Township, one of the poorest townships in South Africa, it's sometimes you don't think certain things are meant for you, when you look around you and you look at poverty. I know many people who are still stuck in those township cycles, and not being able to escape. And it's not so much about the township itself being bad, but about maybe the poverty cycle in some instances, or just not being able to see further. So I think for me, a couple of things, I think why I liked, and when I was in Amsterdam and I would post and I would do things, I would say from Alex to Amsterdam, it was about a girl like me, somebody from the township could end up in this cosmopolitan city, a global headquarters for the organization that I was working for, and that anything is possible. And I think along the way, I've had significant milestones. I think a first big one that stands out for me was going to university at Rhodes, where I felt for me that was definitely the equalizer. So, regardless of whether you came from a township school or Model C school, a private school, you would actually have the opportunity to just prove yourself, And some people couldn't make the transition, even if they came from more privileged environments, and you just had to prove yourself and show up as your best. Of course, with a lot of support, financial aid, etc. But that ability to know that you could actually crack out of that stereotype or that circle of the circumstances under which you were born. I think for me that's what really stands out. And then being in Amsterdam itself, I think that recognition of being having global colleagues from all over the world, quite literally. It was an organization which had representation in Asia, the Americas, Africa, Europe. So seeing yourself as someone who can play at that level, somebody who could lead people from all over the world, definitely, yeah, and achieve a world standard. And I think it just broke that mindset. In fact, one of my friends and I were having this debate about this concept of black excellence, and I'm saying I've dropped the black. It's just about excellence, because sometimes that can also have certain connotations, and it's an ongoing debate. But I think having been on a global stage, I think it's just really saying we are world class and we can all be excellent if we choose to be. And it's really about knowing that it's a possibility for all of us. Yeah,
Is excellence relative?
absolutely.
So if it is relative, it begs the question, right? Because, and I suppose it's up for debate, but it's not something I want to dwell on. What I really want to dwell on is, how do you break out of that mindset, right? That privilege or university, Rhodes University, uh, was was not for you because it meant you had to fight it. At what point did you break that? At what point did you reach the point where you broke through the barriers of black excellence into just excellence? Because again, it's either a conscious decision, it's a realization.
Yeah.
That, hey, you know what? I can do this.
Yeah.
Regardless of the color of my skin.
Yeah.
Regardless of the fact that
Yeah.
I once was a little girl from Alex.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm not sure if I can pinpoint the exact moment, but I think with the university reference. So for me, certainly coming to the university with very little funds, and knowing that I had to work hard to just even get the next loan. I was on what was called the NEFSAs, or some people call it TEFSA, which was a government loan, and it was not guaranteed for the full period. You almost had to earn it year by year as you go along. Uh, I think for me, one of the realizations was just seeing my friends, colleagues around me, again, who had come from different circumstances, that we actually, it was up to the individual how you use or misuse the opportunity. I think that was the first understanding of merit, in the sense that even the people who came from these privileged schools or homes, if you didn't pass and you didn't meet the minimum criteria, people were excluded for academic reasons. I only knew of financial exclusion because that was my fear. Like, I hope I'll never be excluded because we didn't pay the fees. And then I heard of academic exclusion. And then more and more, that sense of, actually, I can be an active player if I keep showing up, whether it's getting my marks, avoiding the academic exclusion. Maybe the financial one was beyond me, but if I showed up also for that, I think for me, it just created the sense of, there was an active role that I could play. I think linking it to the broader growing up in corporate South Africa, then being in corporate globally, I do think, just because of maybe how our corporates have been built, in patriarchy, etc., is there is a definition of gravitas and showing up. And if you don't have enough people who look like you, who are considered to have gravitas and to be at a particular level, it can be limiting. And I think, for me, being on a global platform, seeing other people who had gone before me, it that burst that limitation, in terms of what's possible and not
So
possible
you,
for
you
me.
broke that
And I
ceiling.
definitely, yeah, I felt like I broke that, not just for myself, but for other people who also came after me, to say, you are the best of the best. And which is why that reference for me, and again, success is relative. And I also do understand why we punt for Black excellence, and we should. And, and in this debate I was referring to, I also accept the point, which is because success is relative. And if there's a particular stereotype, or things that we need to demystify around, whether it's poverty or where we come from, it does help to have role models and people who look like you, because representation matters. And that's why we make those references to women in leadership, Black excellence. But it's also recognizing that you should also not just limit yourself to that. There is a global standard. Anybody can be a player, and we should all be aiming to have a piece of that pie. Yeah.
So, do you have a leadership philosophy by which you abide?
Yeah, I have a few. I think the one for me is showing up, which sounds super simple. But we all showing up also is contextual, and sometimes maybe your boss doesn't appreciate you. You don't feel seen in the organization that you're in, or you don't feel like showing up. But when you are showing up on a consistent basis, it all adds up. And for me, I've seen it sometimes through people knowing about my work, and I wouldn't have thought that they know about it. People outside of my organization, being headhunted. I think many things that have happened in my career, which led me to see and to believe that I need to keep on showing up according to the standards and the excellence as I understand it, versus maybe having a constant pat on the shoulder. But actually showing up is quite important. And maybe another one, which I love quite to share a lot, is also always checking on, is my ladder on the right wall, and by that, it's really, for me, just that clarity and focus, because we get all super busy. But are you busy on the right things that are adding value? Yeah, those are two leadership principles which always guide me when I feel overwhelmed and I have to make choices about where to show up and how to show up.
Now, you've been in the game 23 years, if we can call it that. How much has human resources, human capital,
Mm.
evolved
Yeah,
in those 23 years?
a lot.
And I
Mm.
mean, we've got artificial intelligence, which is a few years old, so obviously that's massive. We've also got the Gen Zs,
Yeah.
right? Who I was speaking to someone the other day who said to me that a particular employee, right, works till 4 o'clock or 4:30. In a meeting, 4 o'clock or 4:30, she stood up and said, "My mum's here, guys. I'm going home."
Yeah.
Right. So that's
Yeah.
a different type of employee.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
what you had 23 years ago when you started?
Yeah, yeah. So firstly, the even just the term for the function, some organizations have even evolved it from calling it human resources to human capital, and some to just people. So I see a lot of colleagues saying I'm director of people and culture, etc. I think there's this recognition that yes, people are resources, like how you can have financial resources, but there's also certain connotations of you can deplete resources get used, and I think what's changed over time is the employer employee dynamic has shifted, where bosses and organizations are in charge and employees just do what they're told, to now we have to co-create this work experience. I know some bosses and organizations are still in denial about it, but the reality is employees have a voice, and I think similar to how businesses like Apple have made CX and customer experience quite popular. EX and employee experience is now a thing where actually you have these young people, and coming to your point about the new generation who are vocal. In fact, before the current, I would say, Gen Zs, we had already the millennials, which today the oldest millennial is probably 44 years old. So it's not talking about super young people, but millennials made it not just fashionable, but important for organizations to have purpose. And I feel like the generations after the millennials have taken it to the next level. So it's not just about we're making widgets and we're revenue generators, but what's your purpose as a corporate? Corporates have had to search a little bit more. And now the next generation is even taking it further, where you need to recognize not just my physical difference that I'm a Black female, but invisible differences, neurodiversity, how I think matters, the generational differences, people who still live at home with their parents, but they're also adults in the new workspace. They want to have a life outside of work. They understand that they work to live, they don't live to work. These are all the realities. I've seen that evolution, so from the hierarchy, obsession, to co creating workspaces, and then this generational conversation. And I think the recognition of more and more, the majority of the workforce are people who care about things beyond revenue generation. And so, how do you make employment still appealing? And I think we're struggling. And when I say we, I'm referring to just corporates in general. There's a mental health crisis. Am I supposed to diagnose your anxiety and depression, or should I just be the engineer working on the network? Which one do you want me to do? But I have to be both. I'm a technical person, but I'm a leader of people. I think it's difficult for leaders to show up. And so these are all the things that have been evolving, I would say, in the people space, which require all of us, whether you're HR or just a leader in general, a CEO, is how do we start to shift the energy in the organization?
Njabulo, all of it speaks to inclusivity and diversity, things that you're particularly passionate about.
Yeah.
Right? How have you managed to take a stand in pushing that agenda to represent the people that you look after? Vodacom, close on 6,000 members of staff. So that's a lot of people that you have to look after, right? Walk us through that journey, that fight, if it was, how you as a leader sold this new agenda and got the necessary buy-in.
Yeah. I think, fortunately, Vodafone didn't need a lot of selling in terms of the agenda. I think, though, we've been evolving in terms of which aspects of the diversity and inclusion agenda we've been focusing on. So, our group CEO always speaks about the fact that when he was coming up and he joined the organization from a racial composition, the organization was only 5% transformed. Today, it's 72% transformed. So by the time I came in, that was definitely not an issue. But what has been a big topic is gender. These invisible differences, neurodiversity, issues of LGBT plus, etc. And so it's been leveraging, firstly, the types of transformation we've already had to say, guys, remember we got to this point because there was allyship and there was support and sponsorship. But for myself as a practitioner, I think what has helped is probably a good 5, 10 years before I joined Vodacom, I'd gone on a journey myself, because I think as a leader, you need to develop your own conviction, confidence to be able to bring up issues. I remember the first time I had to deal with diversity and inclusion issues in one of my first director roles. I was extremely nervous. I didn't want to rock the boat. I could see it was not a very diverse organization. People were saying, help change things. And I felt quite anxious about this, having to be the one to call it out. But over time, you grow in that confidence and that muscle to say, actually, I do have a seat at the table. I do have a voice, and how do I best use it to be able to create the change that I want to see? So fast forward to being at a Vodacom, I definitely feel it's been easier. And I think if you call it, I don't know if fight is not the right word, but I think putting a case for whatever, whether it's the lived experiences of women, why we need to look at these invisible differences, neurodiversity, is it even a disability or not? It's meant creating a lot of education, allyship, sponsorship from the leaders to be able to make sure that those voices and those people are seen. And I think when we get feedback from the system in terms of the lived experiences of our people, how do we then take action? So one example is flexibility. Everybody enjoys flexibility, but it's very important for women. And we've said if we've got a woman agenda and we want to get to a 50-50 representation at senior levels, what are the things that we would need to have a look at? So that's what it really takes to create the shifts. Yeah.
So one of the things I want to touch on when we talk about inclusivity and diversity, half the and I'll use battle, half the battle
Yeah.
is obviously the leadership.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other half is the people that you represent,
Yes.
because it cannot be assumed that everybody is ready for inclusivity, right?
Mm.
Everybody is ready for diversity. How do you manage that process?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Very real. I think just throughout my career, I've experienced that. What I've learned over time is using data and facts as the first one, because I think you can also appeal to people's rational side and not just what they might perceive as the emotions of belonging and talking about diversity and inclusion. I think facts tell you a story. So, what are our attrition rates? Maybe we attract the best of the best, but we can't keep them because they don't grow, they don't feel seen. So just using data in terms of what is our composition today, what's the attrition rates, who are we growing and promoting, that helps. That's the one in terms of just factual tracking of numbers. But there's also a softer side in terms of just do we have a conducive environment? And some of it for me, it's just through our, whether it's people surveys, through documenting lived experiences, you start to get intel and feedback from the people that you're representing to say, actually, it's easy to grow here because, or it's difficult to grow here because, and starting to make that practical in terms of making growth opportunities available, removing barriers and obstacles. I've found that's the journey on both sides to reflect it back to the people who are affected, who might not see the progress, and then also for the leadership or the people who create the context for all of this to happen, for them to see their role in it, whether they as allies or sponsors in terms of making sure that it happens.
Now, Ubuntu
Mm.
is something that we talk about, and with it comes an aspect to African leadership,
Mm.
right? Is is leadership one currency, or is there a type of leadership that can be described as African leadership or European or Western type leadership?
Mm.
And again, having worked in diverse cosmopolitan markets, what are some of those key learnings of leadership in Amsterdam, for instance, right? Practices around people that you've embraced and brought back home, and what did you export or what did you leave behind?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, could we coin African leadership? I don't believe so. I think it's contextual. Leadership is contextual. So within Africa, in the global space, you do find organizations or leaders who are still, quite old school, hierarchical, patriarchal. Things only flow from the top down. You find organizations or institutions that are more empowering. What I found, particularly with working in Europe and in the organization that I worked in, it was a high empowerment organization. In fact, I remember at some point we made an acquisition of another organization, and when we had to bring the two together, from the people for the organization that I worked in, were like, why is nobody making decisions? Why are they waiting to be told? And why are people not taking ownership? And we had to workshop this after our first set of people surveys. And the incoming organization, people were clear to say, well, where we come from, if you can't make decisions, and if you make the wrong decision, heads will roll. So best you wait for to be told how to do it and when to do it. And so we had to kind of workshop that, in terms of empowerment and giving people recognition when they do take decisions, etc. So I definitely prefer that approach to leadership of empowering people. You spend a lot of money hiring the best of the best. You set levels and hierarchy, but if you don't allow people to take ownership and decisions, what was the point? So for me, high empowerment, high trust culture or organizations is what works. And I think it's also the point of building structures so that you are able to have different people who help to solve problems. And the most important thing is we are all aligned in terms of the direction and the ambition that we're going. But in terms of entrusting people with the keys to the organization, I always say do your best job to vet the people before, but once they're in, you need to allow them the space to do what they need to do. Yeah.
All right. So coming back to millennials,
Yeah.
disease, there are multiple conversations about skills of the future.
Mm.
Right?
Yes.
You take artificial intelligence into the equation, and it kind of just creates a myriad of potential challenges, right? In your view, what are the skills of the future? What do people need to start thinking about now if they aren't already?
Yeah.
How are you embracing them as head of human capital?
Yeah. I think there's technical hard skills. So, for example, in the technology space, for us, we've spent quite a lot of time on, robotic processing, automation. We work in the cloud space and that kind of thing from a technology perspective. So artificial intelligence, as you've been talking about, there's been hype with generative AI, etc. That's a big thing for us because we are a technology organization. But another interesting set of skills, which is also coming up, is actually how it's more characteristics in terms of people who can deal with ambiguity are going to do better already in the current world and certainly in the future. You want people who have a certain level of agility from a learning perspective because we're not expecting someone fully packaged, but someone who's adaptive and willing to learn and continuously improve. I think the obsession with you got the degree, now you're sorted, that's gone. So it's about having an appetite to continuously learn, an appetite to continuously shift. I think that's going to be the big call in terms of the skills of the future. And I think walking away from, traditional jobs as we know them, Njabulo, employee, so and so, only in HR, but actually it's about skills that I can apply today in HR. Tomorrow I'm working with corporate affairs. Tomorrow I'm with the finance team because we're doing something on org architecture. And that fluidity in organizations is really what organizations of the future and skills of the future are going to be about. Yeah.
Now, we've talked about degrees,
Mm.
right? You've also touched on a level of a certain amount of experience, ability. When you're hiring, are you still looking at, let me see your papers, right?
Yeah.
Versus, geez, dude, you don't have the papers, but this is what you've been able to achieve without them.
Yeah.
And again, if we go back to how many entrepreneurs who've grown billion-dollar businesses either dropped out of university or didn't even go to university, right? It suggests that it may not all be about having a degree or two.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are in that space of transition, to be quite honest. So definitely for certain key roles, we definitely still do emphasize qualifications. But what we are also recognizing is that we are having to shift. The question is, and I think that's the big evolution at the moment. In fact, the government a few years ago already introduced what they call RPA, recognition of prior learning. So you literally take your actual experience and translate that into the equivalent of, a national qualification. It would require putting together a portfolio of evidence, which then can be, translated to this. Therefore, you're at the same level of someone with a degree or whatever.
Is this
Um,
why,
yeah,
sorry to come in, is this
sure.
why certain universities will allow an individual who's been working, say, for 15 years
Correct.
without a first degree to do an MBA?
Correct. Exactly. It's exactly the same concept. So it's our recognition of prior learning and understanding that you can convert that, to be an equivalent. I think what we're struggling with, when I say we again, as a people fraternity, as people who tend to be responsible for these things globally, is in the absence of qualifications, how do you recognize the different levels of experience and knowledge, etc. And I think everyone is going through their thinking. You're hearing a lot about nano degrees where you can do a degree in 2 to 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Is that one solution? Because it is quite important to take into account the depth and the knowledge that I might have versus you, or you might have versus me. And even if we live in a world where there's no qualifications, but I need to be fair in recognizing how your experience might differ from mine. But certainly more and more, that's where we're moving to when we're talking about a shift from jobs to skills. I think we are going to have to face this reality of maybe just rethinking the whole concept of qualifications.
So while you're rethinking,
Mm.
let's talk about the last 23 years.
Yes.
And what about leadership have you had to unlearn?
I think the first one is not having the answers. I
Mm.
think it's genuinely learning to operate in this world where if you're a partner to the business and you say, I don't know, but let's hold hands and let's go find the solution. I think in the early parts of my career, you are looked at as an expert, and particularly in this field where it was about mostly the governance. But very quickly, it was like people can read the policy. They don't have to be told Section 12, number 4 says. But people are looking for a solutions broker, someone who can navigate the ambiguity with them. So for me, I think the one of my strengths and one of the things that I've learned over time is just being okay with not knowing, but it's about the willingness to learn, co-create, find out, so that we can try to keep the business moving.
Now, you've worked for multinationals,
Yeah.
who've embraced different cultures in each
Mm.
of those organizations. What is key in changing a culture in an organization?
Mm.
And I'm not just talking about pruning it
Yeah.
a little bit or sharpening
Mm.
or sandpapering the
Yeah.
edges, if you will. I'm
Yeah.
talking about 180
Like an
or 90
overhaul.
degree
Yeah.
turn.
Yeah.
What is key
Yeah.
in that sort of process?
Yeah. One is leadership. A big part of leadership is also just role modeling, because change leadership is a competency on its own to bring people along on a journey. I think, though, one of the things we don't talk enough about, which is key, is as much as you're calling out the vision and the to be picture in terms of where you're going, you have to be crystal clear about the opposite, what you will not tolerate. And so, because what tends to happen in the change process is the old will still show up, and even if it's showing its little pinky finger, you need to cut it while it's still, early. If anything contradicts what you believe or what you say you are trying to change towards. Because what can happen, because change resistance is a thing, change fatigue is a thing, is people can hold on to what is comfortable, what they preferred. So that ability to not only call out the new, but to really make sure that there is no room for the old to still exist in the way that it did, is one of the things that creates lasting change, because people do see that you actually don't engage with the old way of doing things anymore. In fact, you maybe disagree or disapprove of it. And that's part of reinforcing how things would be from a shift perspective.
So 23 years in HR, it's a huge milestone. How are you reimagining the next chapter?
Yeah, I think this point around co-creating employee experiences, um, I'm still experimenting with it. In our organization, we've introduced the concept of hyper personalization. How should we be showing up differently for our young people versus our colleagues who are on the age of retiring,
Mm.
versus women, versus our technology colleagues? And I think it's really part of the challenge that I'm giving myself is I don't have to have all the answers. I'm willing to co-create the employee experience, but it means experimenting and breaking some of your traditional ways of doing things. I think that's the big one for me, and something that I'm genuinely passionate about is with mental health being now this new pandemic. What is it that as people practitioners we can do to help people to come to work well? I mean, the debate is still out there. Do organizations do too much? Should we be doing as much as we do in some instances? But the reality is, if you want people to show up fully and to bring their best, you are going to have to challenge them, the system rather, in terms of how we help people to show up at their best. Yeah.
So, what would Njabulo, the C-suite executive, the globetrotter, the exposed, the successful woman, tell a 25-year-old Njabulo?
Hmm. um, Keep going. That's the first one. It's definitely not an easy journey, but so much awaits. So I think for me, it's very much about the resilience. We can get tired and we rest, but we don't give up. That's really would be the big message. But yeah, the best is yet to come.
And as we wrap, what drives your happiness, both at work and away from
Hmm.
work?
That's an interesting one. Well, out of work, I love playing golf and just being outside in nature. Currently, it is driving my happiness. But I think just finding more time to just return to myself, whether it's through hikes, whether it's spending time with family. I'm really finding that creating space for me outside of any other obligations just makes me a better person, a better partner, mother, and just helps me to show up better in the world. Yeah.
So you said the magic word there, and I'm going to have to talk a little bit about
Mm.
golf.
Nice. Don't ask me my handicap.
What about golf
Yeah.
makes it so addictive? Because I
Mm.
think it is.
Yeah.
And the beauty of golf and the handicap is you don't have to be the most talented individual,
Mm.
but it's just engaging in the sport, right?
Yeah.
And when you pick up on what makes it so addictive, walk us through how that experience can be applied to life or to work.
Yeah. I think one of the beautiful things about golf is you have to be there fully present. So focus. Even if your mind is racing, once you hit a few bad shots, you just really want to be here and get
Mm.
it right. So that's been one of my lessons. I love it because it's one of the few things that really just takes me away
Yeah.
from the noise. And I think that's a lesson in life to you really need to just be fully present. We in this very busy world, we all talk about being present. Golf for me is one of the things that helps me to do that. It also keeps you humble because you can have a really great game and the next one is really terrible, and then sometimes you want to quit. But I think that allure to come back and try again. And so yeah, I think it's also a good life principle. To stay humble, but also just to keep trying. So yeah, those are some of the things that I really enjoy. Besides being out in nature, yeah.
What keeps you grounded?
Hmm. The people, I think, just really, if you are driving the people agenda with the people in mind, that's what keeps you humble to see the impact of the work, whether it's people's growth in their career, whether it's helping somebody solve an issue
Mm.
in their personal circumstances, which can help them to show up. For me, that's part of really what keeps on giving me that excitement. We're about to welcome another set of graduates coming in, and for the first time, it's some of the girls who we started with in a program called Code Like a Girl. So high school, bursary, internship, and now you're gonna be working. I think that will never stop being fulfilling for me, just to see the impact of small decisions, but that are huge in other people's lives, which can lead to a whole trajectory shift in their life. Yeah.
And the very last thing I'd like you to speak to Njabulo is 10-year-old,
Mm.
the 15-year-old, who's in Alex,
Mm.
who's in Orange Farm, who's in Guguletu,
Mm.
who's in Kailija,
Mm.
right? About the world of possibility
Yes.
for them.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, there's so much. I think I'm one example. There are many, many examples, but I would say for me, the message is to believe in your dreams. Sometimes you might not see people in your immediate environment, or your environment might not tell you that you can reach all of your dreams, but it is possible. I think hopefully by seeing people like myself, you are inspired to be able to believe that you can reach the top of your game, whatever that means for you, whether you're in the corporate world, whether you're an artist, whether you've got another talent. I would say it's to keep the focus. For me, education is a game changer. And it's really about just choosing that there is a bigger world out there. Yeah.
Njabulo, appreciate your time. It's been
Thank
an
you.
enthralling conversation. Would have loved to have more time, but certainly we must do it again, and
Yeah.
maybe even do it on the golf course.
Yeah. Looking forward to that. Thank you, Hugo. Thank you.
Now, so we leave this conversation, another leadership conversation. Njabulo Mashigo, incredible individual from Alex to Amsterdam. Until next time, keep watching. Goodbye.